retired Chief Mark Garrett.
Retired SAC.
Retired SAC. Two retired guys trying to keep busy, Mark, huh?
Yeah, no doubt.
Today, we're going to talk about something that's been in the news a bunch, especially since the election, I would say. Designating the drug cartels in Mexico foreign terrorist organizations. It's a popular topic right now. Like I said, Tom Homan, the incoming border czar, he pretty much said definitively that it's going to be done. A couple other reasons why I think this is a big conversation point now is fentanyl right now, a synthetic opiate drug that's illicitly manufactured in Mexico. And for the most part, that's where the drugs killing Americans come from. It is the number one leading cause of death for Americans between the ages of 18 and 45. That's unbelievable. That's more than car accidents, gun violence, all the other things you hear about a lot. No, it's actually not just drug deaths, but specific fentanyl deaths, the number one cause of death, 18 to 45. And 70% of all the drug-caused overdoses or poisonings in the United States are caused by fentanyl. And like I said, these are drugs. This is a drug manufactured in Mexico for the most part, coming into the States across our border. Any amount of the drug that's not coming from Mexico right now directly into the United States, probably insignificant to our problem. There is a little bit of an uptick, I would say, in fentanyl coming directly from China to the U.S. or chemicals coming directly from China to the U.S. and people manufacturing fentanyl here in the States and pressing fake pills, going back to something that was real popular in like 2014, 2015. But still, this pales in comparison to the quantity of drugs coming in from Mexico. Another reason why this is a hot topic now, Mark, and you and I have both talked about this before. I don't remember when, but Mexico likes to use their drug policy as a foreign policy tool,
Yep.
or even a weapon. Even I would say a weapon, a foreign policy weapon. In other words, if you want, we ask the government of Mexico to do something related to drugs, and it's, well, we might be able to discuss that if you can do X, Y, and Z. Finally, the thing that I think has really brought this to the forefront, and to be clear, I used to be against designating drug cartels as foreign terrorist organizations. And I'll talk about why. My mind has changed, right? And this next point is one of the main reasons why my mind has changed. I feel like now, a lot of times we talk about, as Americans, we talk about corruption in the Mexican government. I think it's almost to the point where it's state-sponsored narco trafficking. And I know that's a pretty strong statement. And there'll be people that say, oh, come on, I don't know, what do you call that, Mark, when you're kind of fanning the flames, or I don't know, gaslighting, is that a thing? Or
I don't know if it's gaslighting, but, certainly...
being dramatic?
Yeah.
Being dramatic. But I want people to remember that Genaro Garcia Luna, right, the Secretary of Public Safety in Mexico from 2006 to 2012, someone who I met him in Tegucigalpa, like maybe 2006, 2007, when he first got that job. He was arrested in December 2019 and eventually convicted here in the United States, sentenced to 38 years in prison for drug trafficking. The Minister of Public Safety, this is a cabinet level person in the Mexican government, right?
Right.
Salvador Cienfuegos, the Secretary of Defense, another cabinet level position in Mexico. He was arrested in this country in the fall of 2020. The charges were dropped eventually because of what I would term diplomatic issues, I guess. But this is one where I saw the evidence firsthand on him. I saw, and he was indicted by a grand jury. This isn't like a probable cause arrest was made. In other words, DEA agents didn't just go out and snatch this guy up and say he's a drug trafficker. Federal prosecutors were involved in the Eastern District of New York, went to a grand jury with the evidence, presented the evidence to them, and they said, yes, we feel there's enough probable cause to hold, to charge this person and bring him here to the United States. And again, those charges were dropped. So there's two high-level Mexican officials that have been charged with drug trafficking. And there's a video here I want to play you. And I thought of you as soon as I saw this, because I know you were Chief California Highway Patrol. And as a new officer or new patrolman, worked the highways, the freeways of California. I want you to watch this next clip, and it's going to be in the Spanish language, but there's subtitles in it. And I will ask Anthony to stop at one point when he's playing it, because there's a term in there that's kind of cryptic that, you know, most Americans wouldn't probably know. And I'm going to tell you what that means, and then we'll pick it up again. And I want to get your thoughts after it. So this is a traffic stop in Mexico. Go ahead, Anthony.
In a shocking viral video, members of the Sinaloa cartel are seen speeding through red lights in their luxury vehicles until a police officer suddenly confronts them, leading to a tense exchange.
Okay, pause it right there. When he says we're from Chapiza, he's saying basically we work with the element of the Sinaloa cartel that's loyal to the sons of Chapo, the Chapitos. So that's kind of the slang term with them. He says we're Chapiza. That means that, hey, we're with this group of the Sinaloa cartel, just so you know who you're dealing with. Now go ahead, Anthony.
In a shocking viral video.
So did you catch that at the end, Mark? The people in the car asked the officers, do you want problems? And they said no. And he said, okay. Bye. So this is just a traffic stop, right? This is just a traffic stop in Mexico. And my point in showing this is, I talked about where it's at the highest levels. Corruption is at the highest levels in Mexican government. And now you see it on the street where some guy pulled over in a Lamborghini for speeding, tells him what his cartel affiliation says, and says, do you want a problem? Mm-hmm. How does that play out in California, Mark?
Well, it plays out in California not very well, because the only person who's going to have a problem in the long run is the perpetrator, the violator, the person we stop. It's beyond night and day when we talk about corruption or lack thereof between the federales, the Mexican law enforcement officers as a whole, and really California law enforcement or any law enforcement agency across this country. That's not something that you're going to see in California. It's not something you're going to see in most agencies. This goes back to, I mean, I'm talking about with most officers it's so rare. One of the reasons that things are so rare like this nowadays, especially here in the United States, or say primarily here in the United States, Bill, is, and not only, but the introduction of body cams and MVARs, mobile vehicle audio recording devices, things like this, it's really made it clear how up and up law enforcement in the United States is as a whole, as a profession, as an industry. The training, the standards that we're held to. Juxtapose that to what you saw, and I hadn't seen that video before. I'm glad you left me here hanging until I saw it with the audience. This was something I was thinking about when we were preparing for this show. The last couple of days, I was just thinking about it, and then today, listening to your intro. There is a culture of corruption in Mexico, and you laid it out so well. You always bring the receipts, Bill, to these shows. You always bring very, very tangible examples. And those two officials, or former officials, high-ranking officials in the Mexican government, illustrate exactly what you're talking about. This is a cultural issue in the country of Mexico when it comes to law enforcement and its relationship with these cartels. And we will definitely get into the reasoning behind and the purpose of the effectiveness of designating these groups as FTOs, foreign terrorist organizations. So it's a great video, and people should realize this is systemic in Mexico.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, without a doubt, it is. And as I said earlier, I used to be against designating these groups foreign terrorist organizations, and obviously the Mexican government is against it. But just to make clear what my opinion is, they're against it because they have a fear that Mexican officials would start getting charged with providing material support to terrorist groups. And that's, one of the more serious worldwide charges, right? So when you start, if you were to start charging Mexican government officials With terrorism, ooh, that's a whole different thing. So why did I used to be against this? I always felt like I always felt like in order for a group to be a terrorist group, there had to be some political ideology, right? And although that's not technically a requirement, I felt like it couldn't just be a for-profit organization. Like even if you're doing a lot of violence and the motive is profit, is that in my mind was that or is that really terrorism? When you have a hatred of the West, the Western lifestyle, maybe Christians, Jews, whatever it is, if there's a political or religious ideology, it's a lot easier for me to identify that group as terrorism because it's not necessarily profit based. It's not a criminal organization trying to make money. It's a group just expounding hate or doing something because of a hateful intent or an ideology. The other reason I used to be against this is it really does, I think, complicate legal proceedings when the intel community gets involved in criminal cases, because a lot of, what information would be classified? How do you bring classified information into a court, a criminal court? It's very difficult to do. I won't say it can't be done, but it's very difficult, very cumbersome to do. And how about asylum cases? Like there's a lot of talk about immigration now. If you take these big groups and designate them as terrorist organizations, I always thought, wow, one cartel member who's being hunted by another cartel could claim political asylum in the United States and say, my life's in danger. This terrorist group is hunting me down. And I thought that, hey, although it's great to say terrorist designation means that the U.S. will do unilateral military operations to target these traffickers or whatever, what's even now, like, what's the likelihood of doing that? I don't know. Maybe it's gotten bigger. Whenever people tell me now that will never happen, I say, remember Osama bin Laden? Mm-hmm. He was in Pakistan. Don't forget. I mean, maybe people think, oh no, he was in Afghanistan. No, he was in Pakistan. The U.S. went in, grabbed him, executed him, and kidnapped his body. Without notifying the Pakistani government ahead of time. I think it was kind of contemporaneous with the people hitting the ground there. They said, we have people here doing this, don't interfere. So there is a history of the U.S. doing unilateral actions in third-party countries to target members of terrorist organizations when they're high level. And then finally, the thing that troubled me, and I think this is changing right now because of what's happening in the political arena, literally right now, Mark, and I'm curious to get your thoughts on it. I was not comfortable with the intel community, our intel community in the United States, having a lead role in going after drug trafficking organizations. Mm-hmm. I've seen them personally kind of corrupt or bastardize systems to kind of pursue other interests. Right. In other words, maybe they're protecting a drug trafficker who's providing to them information on something else that they have a mission to do. And I think now, with some potential changes that are coming in the intel community, I think probably I'm in a place where I would trust them more that they would pursue this as a priority. And it would not be used as a leverage point to do other things around the world. What do you think, Mark? What do you think about where I was at with this and the concerns that I used to have? And then I guess after I hear your thoughts, we'll talk about what it actually means to designate and then the pros and cons.
Well, let me start with the last point you made, Bill. There's a lot to unpack there, a lot of good stuff to unpack. And the last thing you talked about was the intel community and being used in these operations. Look, we could and probably should do an entire show on the intel community itself and what it's going to look like come January 20th, 2025, as opposed to what it looks like now. There's a lot of controversial picks happening with the new incoming administration. And listen, the president-elect has made it known that he wants to completely change the culture of these agencies. So does that have an impact on how I see them in these operations or how they might be used, things absolutely. In other words, if you have a high level of trust in a leader or organization, then you're going to have a trust in a particular operation in which they're engaged. So that's something to think about right there. I think that the intel community has been, like you use the word, bastardized. They're using maybe one operation as leverage for another motivation, or motivation for another operation, or another reason to be in a country or to interrogate people. It's all become very, very gray. And so I think that we're going to see some of those things cleaned up that you and I are both concerned about. Going back to why you were against it. Now, this all came out, of course, out of 9/11. You talked about Osama bin Laden, the Patriot Act, designating these FTOs, foreign terrorist organizations, all came from. I won't use the word ambivalent, because it just means like whatever. I have no opinion. I'm gonna raise my hand and just say present. I kind of saw both sides of this road that they went down after the Patriot Act, with designating individuals, or I'm sorry, organizations, terrorist groups. I understood and I believe that the motivation was good at the time. I think probably the majority of Americans felt the same way. We can't have this happen again. We have to be more proactive. We have to be more aggressive, things like this. But I also saw the potential for abuse, and we've certainly seen that over the years. But that's really what came out of. I'm with you. I have moved, especially in the last 3 or 4 years, I have really moved into the camp of being able to designate these particular cartels as foreign terrorist organizations. And we can get into some of the details why. One of the things you talked about a couple of minutes ago, Bill, was about the Mexican officials who don't want this designation, of course, because they're afraid of being implicated, indicted, things like this. You're absolutely right, but I think there's more to it than that. We have to understand, if these cartels, and that video you played is a great example of what I'm going to talk about. These cartels, if they are designated foreign terrorist organizations by this incoming administration, what's going to happen is now that these people who've been involved with them, the highest levels of government in Mexico, are now going to find themselves between a rock and a hard place. It's not just about the fear of going to prison. It's the fear of, oh my God, if I do turn state's evidence, if I stop helping these if I, whatever it is, now I've got to watch out for the United States. I've got to watch out for these terrorists who may kill me or my family. I think that's probably the biggest motivation, the most immediate motivation for them, hoping that they will not be declared terrorist organizations, including the loss of their power, including the loss of their money. All of these things would be a factor in them opposing this designation. Finally, not finally, but you talked about Osama bin Laden and how he went into Pakistan. And by the way, for everybody who knows my political views and things like this, I literally applauded the Obama administration. I stood up in my living room when I saw that. The crowd was at the White House. They were cheering USA, and I gave him all the credit for that. And I actually had tears in my eyes. I was so proud that we went in there and did that. Now, here's the thing. It was Pakistan. Would we have done the same thing had Osama bin Laden been hiding out in Beijing or Moscow?
Right.
Probably not. And because the trade-off would have been probably not worth it, and probably maybe not even militarily possible. So it is a case-by-case situation where we deploy our resources, our forces, and things like this, juxtaposed to the damage that's being inflicted in the United States. Finally, your point about asylum, and who might listen. This is why the entire asylum process is a joke right now. See, all of these things we're talking about with the intel, the communities, and being used for purposes they're not supposed to be used for, the asylum process, all of these things have disintegrated and become a complete chaotic mess in the last, not just 4 years, but the last probably 20 years. The asylum process is supposed to be a very vigorous case-by-case process where you look at the circumstances. And by the way, if you were involved, if one was involved with the cartels in Mexico or any cartel around the world, and now they say, listen, I want to help, I want to get out of there, blah, blah, blah. You know what? It's up to the United States to decide. It's up to a particular administration to say, you know what? We can use you. You're worth giving asylum to because of the intel you have for us. So you know what? You just weren't high enough in the organization. You don't benefit us enough. So you know what? We're not going to give you asylum. Mm-hmm. These are hard facts of life that we have to deal with as a country. These people we didn't put them in those positions, whether you are an official in the Mexican government or you are a captain in a Mexican cartel. Those are decisions you made. And now if we did designate these cartels as FTOs and now the cockroaches start spreading around when lights go on, guess what? It's our right to decide who we are going to house, who we are going to protect for our benefit, not for yours. That's what the asylum process is meant to be there for people who are fleeing true terrorism and oppression and things like this. We decide on a case-by-case basis. Now, by the way, most people seeking asylum are not involved in criminal activity or things that are going to harm the U.S. They're coming in to escape those things. They're coming here innocently. But in this case, it's completely up to the United States. It's our right as a country to decide who we are going to protect. And that's the bottom line there.
Yeah. And just to piggyback off a couple of those things, when corruption in Mexico, right? I mentioned I met Garcia Luna, and I don't remember, like I said, 2006, 2007 or something. Even at that time, so 13 years, Mark, before he was arrested, it was pretty well known in DEA that you talk to him about X organization, but you don't talk to him about Y organization. And that's generally the way the corruption works there. Is obviously you're not, well, I shouldn't say obviously, you're not on the payroll. There's the two big drug cartels in Mexico, Sinaloa Cartel, which there's different factions of, and the Jalisco New Generation Cartel. You're generally not on the payroll of both, right? You have to pick who your alliance is to. And with Garcia Luna, it was a Sinaloa Cartel. So whenever there was a meeting, he would always want to hear all the information about which cartel, the Sinaloa Cartel. And my thing is like, we don't really have anything on them. I don't know. Do you have anything on them? But this other group, we have a lot of information on them. And he would take action on the other group. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? So yeah. It's almost like knowing who he was aligned with, you could still accomplish things against his enemies. His enemies were also our enemies. But that's an interesting dynamic in Mexico is, the politicians they're loyal to one group or the other, and it's just kind of rooting out which is which. The other thing is, which I think really made me change my mind on this designation, was somebody who worked in Mexico when when Trump's first administration, right, the first time he was president, and I think he sent out a tweet about maybe there was some Americans executed by accident. There was like a mistaken identity in Juarez or something like that. I don't know if I have the circumstances right with it or not, but it turned out to be, drug cartel related. And he sent a tweet to something to the effect of, maybe we should designate these drug cartels foreign terrorist organizations. Mm-hmm. And that tweet probably had more impact on the cooperation DEA got with the Mexican government than most other, quote, diplomatic attempts. You know what I mean by that?
Yes, absolutely.
And then the new administration comes in, and for some reason they feel the need to take that off the table immediately, to say like what we won't do. We won't. We're not going to. Don't worry. We're not thinking about. We're not thinking about designating drug cartels as terror. Okay, well, that's one less thing for the Mexican government to worry about. Then that's one less negotiating tool the U.S. has. So I think the fact that this is being discussed even now, whether it ever happens or not, I don't know, but it's a negotiating tool, and why it would be overlooked and not used to its fullest? I don't know. And finally, a key position that hasn't been filled yet, and I don't know, generally they're probably some of the later ones, who's going to be the ambassador to Mexico? I think that's going to be a key point if we really want to make headway with a lot of the issues that the incoming president campaigned on: immigration, drug trafficking. Right? They're going to need to have an ambassador to Mexico that's very strong. And in the past, like, I've seen what happens when there's a weak person there. They're hesitant to be involved in conflict. They just want to make the Mexican government happy. And guess what? The Mexican government just eats that up. They don't respect that, right? They see that as weakness, and they'll just roll over us, which is what has happened. So first off, Mark, what would this designation mean? You know, going through the actual the law, material support becomes unlawful. So there's that means that it could mean if you're selling drugs in the United States and those drugs can be traced to a drug cartel in Mexico, that you're providing material support to a foreign terrorist organization. That's pretty drastic. That would be a drastic application of it. Members of these groups, representatives of these groups become inadmissible to the United States and could potentially be deported if they're aliens. Blocking transactions with certain entities, and a good example of this, and this is a real life example, is a drug kingpin or drug trafficking organization that owns a resort, and an American travels to that resort and uses their credit card from an American bank. That transaction would be blocked. Mm-hmm. So that person would be unable to use that credit card. Now, some of these tools, the other one, asset seizure and freezing of assets and asset seizure, like these financial things aren't new. There was something called the Kingpin Act, and I don't know when that was passed, maybe like the late 90s. OFAC, Office of Foreign Asset Control, something that was established to target the financial infrastructure of drug cartels, kind of put them on blast, so to speak. So all these entities and people that were involved in drug trafficking, all the businesses they own, they would be listed, and it would become a violation of U.S. law to do business with these entities. And even there were examples of people like getting a letter from their credit card company, and it would say like, hey, when you go to this place, you can't use your credit card because we're not allowed to have any financial dealings with that property because of X reasons. So a lot of the tools that are there that would be, used legal, for example, prosecutions. Now you're charging material support. It's just not, that's not going to really turn the tide, because you can charge someone with drug trafficking probably easier than you could charge someone with material support. Here's the example I'll use, Mark, and I remember talking to you about this, and I was pretty critical of this. Attorney General Garland at one point put out a memo, and they were trying to ensure that minimum mandatory sentence drug cases were not charged that frequently. They wanted less people charged with these minimum mandatory cases. And one thing they said was, oh, if the person's affiliated with a drug cartel, of course we're going to charge minimum mandatory sentence. But that requires extra work, right? It can be proven and it can be established, but it requires a lot of extra work. And for what? The sentences are generally the same. So what I'm saying is that a lot of the tools, I think, that come with this designation, they're not really tools that we don't have right now. The only one that I see as being really significant is the ability to get the U.S. Military involved.
Right.
You see anything else in that?
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head, Bill, with being able to get the U.S. military involved.
Uh-huh.
In other words, it is simply the imposition of this designation on a country. Hey, you are housing, aiding, and abetting this behavior. You are allowing and you're encouraging these organizations to flourish in your country. And so now we are going to put them on the same kind of level as we did in Osama bin Laden, as we do terrorist organizations around the world. We're going to put them on the same level in regards to threat to our country. So do you want to deal with that or not? I agree with you, because I looked through this as well, what it means to designate and things like this. And yeah, okay, the financial and this and that and the nexusity of all these things are kind of already in place now. On this side of the border. We can take care of a lot of these things. But I said, you hit the nail on the head. It's the fact that the U.S. is now, proposed to designate these cartels as foreign terrorist organizations. So here's the threat. Here's the threat that our military can come into your country. That yes, we can come in. We can bring you back here as a conspirator, as a co-conspirator, or any number of behaviors. One of the things that you hit on the military bill is that, and again, you and I don't think this should apply to every organization across the country. I mean, across the world. I couldn't agree with you more. But here is something very significant about the two cartels that you talked about. They operate as military organizations within and outside of Mexico. They operate with military equipment, military training, military command staff. They act as pseudo-military. And we saw it again with that officer right there. Do you want any problems? Nope, bye.
Right.
Okay. Because he felt like he was dealing with illegal Green Berets, that officer. That's what he felt like. Hey, you know what? They're going to kill my family first, and they're going to torture and kill me afterwards.
Right.
So this is what we're dealing with. We're not dealing just with the commercial side of this. We're dealing with organizations that act as pseudo-military within and outside of their own borders. Number two, as far as the designation. And we talked about this before. I think it probably was with Merrick Garland and the minimum sentences. I can't remember now, but I think it was that show, Bill. But whatever it was, we talked about this. And you raised this point. You gave the stats. Like I said, you always bring the receipts. I think 18 to 45-year-old or 18 to 40-year-old at the beginning is the highest percentage, and the highest sub or category.
Yeah.
I think if you dig a little bit deeper, the deaths tend to be on the lower end of that 18 to 45. Right? It's not, 38 years old, or the plurality is probably between 18 and 25. I'm just pulling that out of my rear end.
Yeah.
But I'm very comfortable it's at the low end. People may think that this is like grandiose, or I'm really thinking way ahead. But here's the problem. When you have 100,000 Americans dying every year from fentanyl coming from Mexico, and the vast majority are young people, this is undermining our military capability for the next generation and the next generation. We have an all-volunteer force right now. And if you're losing 18 and 20 and 23 and 24-year-olds every year by the tens of thousands who many of them would volunteer for the military, or they'd be called up if we had a draft, this is a significant issue. Look, in World War II, a lot of our enemies devised weapons that did not kill on purpose. They were only designed to injure. And the reason is because they wanted 4 GIs to be tied up, taking care of 1 GI, getting them back to a hospital. So these things about, undermining your ability to put manpower to front lines is nothing new, and it's not something that we should take lightly. So that's why I'm 100% in favor of designating these organizations as foreign terrorist organizations, because they are a threat today and a threat tomorrow to our national security.
That's a very interesting point, Mark, that you bring up. And I do remember you saying that before. And just to add on to that, the numbers bear this out. I've seen the drug cause death numbers, more male than female. So there's a disproportionate impact on males that are that, quote, military age, unquote, in this country. And that's something you have to consider when you look at this. So Mark, what does an organization, is there a criteria for this? Yeah, the State Department does have a criteria for establishing a group as a foreign terrorist organization. It's real simple. 1, has to be a foreign organization. 2, engage in or retain the capability and intent to engage in terrorism. You just talked about the military nature. I mean, we've seen the weapons and the videos of the capabilities of these organizations in Mexico. There's no doubt that military capability exists. We've seen instances going back a few years where they have. So there's one situation where Ovidio Guzman, Chapo's son, was arrested almost by accident, Mark, and his organization rolled in and shut down a town, went to a local military base and basically isolated it and said, we're going to start executing the families of the soldiers that are out there doing this unless they let him go. And the president of Mexico gave the order to let him go. Right. So that is really kind of what we're talking about here, right? That's, the threat of kidnapping or death or whatever because someone's doing their job, working in the military. I mean, imagine if a group in the United States started targeting the families of military members serving overseas. Like what would happen here in the United States? And the final prong, the third prong, threaten the security of nationals or the national defense, foreign relations, or the economic interests of the United States. Really, you could say it really does all three. Absolutely. Because of the disproportionate deaths that it's causing, the workforce, the military age males, the ability to staff a military, all those things. I feel it does, and cartel violence is increasing. Probably drug violence on probably both sides of the border, and some people just I think it's a matter of principle. Like if we have the ability to do this, we should do this. It can't hurt, right? I think the value. Go ahead.
Well, listen. even I, who I'm strongly in support of this particular application. When it comes to designating these groups, even I will never say that it can't hurt. There can certainly be drawbacks. I want to be very honest about this and very sober about it. There can be some bumps in the road. Not to be flip about it. However, when you compare it to what we're dealing with right now, is it worth the risk of unforeseen problems? I think that it is right now, because what we're dealing with right now is so impactful. It's so tragic and it's so evil, and it's a complete threat to national security. So I would say it's not 100%, nothing foolproof, but I think it should be done.
Yeah. And I think the value is for sure in a negotiating tool.
Yes. By the way, negotiations really are only as strong as the negotiator.
Yeah.
And like I said, I praised President Obama when he took out bin Laden, and I'm praising Donald Trump now for saying, you know what? Sorry, guys, you've had enough time. It's over. Tom Homan, it's over. Now you're going to start paying the piper. So I try to be objective about this, but because Trump people, rightly or wrongly, but in a political sense, in a strategic sense, they fear him. Yep. Are enemies. And so your negotiations or proposed negotiations are only as strong as a negotiator. They don't come stronger than Donald Trump.
Yeah. So other tools so what tools would this bring to the table, or the case for doing it? Enhanced surveillance and intelligence developing. Yes, but again, when it comes from the intel community, Mark, it can't really be used in court. Like the intel community, very protective of sources and methods. And are there ways to bring it into court? Yeah, but I don't really see that happening. Financial and legal measures, not that much different than what we can do now.
Well, Bill, I want to step in. Please don't lose your spot there. I want you to continue. Yeah. But I want to push back a little bit on that. Mm-hmm. Is that sources and things like this, intel can't be used in court. Well, they haven't been used in court. There have been decisions made. There have been SOPs that have been written.
Correct.
There have been past practice that has now been set in concrete. Well, we've always done it this way. In other words, we have to remember something here, that the president can declassify anything that he or she wants to. Mm-hmm. Can declassify anything. Now, we would never want to do that at the risk of undermining sources and methods. Absolutely. But I do think that the intel community has become too self-serving, too mm-hmm. insular. No, we're going to, no. And they're going to ask the president to classify this or that or whatever it is. Or they're going to, by the way, I'm sure a lot is done without the commander in chief's knowledge anyway.
Mhm.
So there's never any chance to classify or declassify. So if we're looking at a holistic approach to dealing with these cartels, a revision in what is admissible, I say admissible, what intel communities are going to give up for court proceedings, that might change. We may see a new process here that we've not experienced in the last long time.
Yeah, and it's so this conversation leads me to, what is it called? Guantanamo Bay?
Yeah.
Where, and the reason why people went to Gitmo, or the reason why the U.S. took terrorist suspects to Gitmo, was because they felt they perhaps couldn't charge them in a U.S. court. Here's where I'm getting at with this, Mark. When I said enhanced surveillance and intelligence, but not for court. And yes, you are correct. We could change the guidelines and what we're going to use in court or not. But I think what will not change was the evidence collected constitutionally? Does it have to be collected constitutionally? Mm-hmm. In other words, hypothetically, if I told you, hey, Mark, we can, if I know a drug kingpin's phone number, I can punch it in this system and the wiretap begins tomorrow. And we start listening to all his conversations. There's no judicial review of this.
Right.
You know, is that something that's going to be used in court in this country? Probably not. Well, if it's a FISA wire, you know, there's been a lot of talk about that over the past 5 years.
Yes.
Have we used FISA stuff in court? Not so much, but as you said, that could change, and we could start.
And again, another example where the tool has been so abused.
Yes.
And clearly used illegally. So, but your point, you're absolutely right. There are some things that can be obtained. They're simply not admissible in court, period. Right. I totally agree with you. But there are other things that, for whatever reasons I'll probably never know, I can speculate about, that can be introduced to court, into court, but have not been. But no, you raise a great point about some things that are just simply not admissible, no matter how transparent agency wants to be.
Yeah. And, you know, it's a good point. Like a lot of times the intel community won't want stuff coming out just because they want to hold all the cards.
That's
right. To be blunt, you know, information is power. And that's an issue. Sanctions, you know, like I said, already in place through OFAC, the Office of Foreign Asset Control, part of the Department of Treasury. They designate a bunch of people that the U.S. can't do business with. And joint work with other countries is a big plus for this. We do now joint drug work with what's called the Five Eyes, Mark. Let me see if I can name them all. U.S., Great Britain, Australia, New Zealand, Canada. I think that's 5. Mm-hmm. They all, you know, already were sharing intelligence and investigative work around the world targeting drug cartels. So what are some of the arguments against it? I guess the big argument I see against it is, you know, where do you draw, one of the arguments, Mark, and I think you kind of alluded to this, is where do you draw the line? Is MS-13 a foreign terrorist organization? Is this new gang, the Venezuelan gang, Tren de Agua?
Yeah.
Are they a foreign terrorist organization? The Bloods, well, Bloods are domestic. You know, I guess that wouldn't fit the criteria. But you can see kind of what I'm saying is, you know, where are you comfortable drawing the line on this?
Well, I think it's a totality of the organization, and I think we've really detailed, you know, why these cartels are really kind of almost in a category of their own, and why they should be. You're right. We can't, even if we wanted to, we don't have the resources to actually deal with every single organization that we could designate, maybe, even under the current criteria. But what we need to do, Bill, is because of the reasons we laid out here, we discussed the military operation, the impact on our current generation, next generation. By the way, the entanglement with the Mexican government, in other words, the own country is involved in this. So it's not like they're trying to fight it themselves. I think that we have to make a stand with as much logic and intel as possible. Like I said, you guys do bring the receipts. Here's what's happening. Here is how our national security and sovereignty is being affected by this particular group. The other thing, to your point about the other MS-13, other gangs, is why do we think they have flourished so much over the last decade? Because they're seeing other organizations like these cartels flourish. There's people are copycats. People become emboldened. Okay, they're doing it. We can do it. They're not stopping us. We can go back and forth across the border. We can set up our networks in every city in the United States. In other words, people follow. Criminals follow. I will go out on a limb here. I'm being facetious. It's not much of a limb. That if we start putting the hurt to organizations that we're talking about here, these drug cartels in Mexico, in a really, really powerful, tangible, and efficient way, that we're going to see an ancillary reduction in gang behavior from other entities that are not on the, because look, they do not want to be next.
Yep.
They do not want to be next. Look, this is something that the mafia has. It's been their unwritten rule. They don't F around the law enforcement generally. There's some exceptions here and there. They don't like to bring heat on themselves. That goes back to the last 100 years. I think we'll see the same effect. We'll see minds change in these organizations if America starts taking action appropriately with these ones that we designate as FTOs.
So I guess, we're getting down near the end, Mark. Is it the potential diplomatic disruption that this would cause? Should we as a country be past that? Should we say, like, who cares if the Mexican government is a little upset over this? Look, we've been looking the other way and ignoring this problem for too long, or we've been allowing this problem to flourish so close to our border that now we're paying the price to it? I mean, do we just say, hey, there's going to be this period where diplomacy is a little tense with Mexico? That's just going to be how it is. Do we have to be okay with that?
Well, look, Mexico is going to ultimately have to be okay with whatever the U.S. decides. By the way, just as we have to be okay, we have to accept the reality of whatever Mexico does. We don't have to be okay with it. They don't have to be okay with it. But I would never say, I know you're just kind of paraphrasing, but I would never have the attitude of, well, who cares what Mexico thinks? Diplomacy it's compromise. It's trying to get something you want in exchange for what the other side wants. And if just the threat alone of these organizations being designated as terrorist organizations, that Mexico internally steps up their game, listen, that's a win for us. Now, ultimately, it's a win for Mexico down the road if they can curtail this internal strife that they fomented, they've actually been a part of. It's a win. But I think ultimately, say, listen, here is your opportunity to be a partner in fighting this evil, this terror. You can work with us, or you can be bystanders, or worse yet, you can be a part of the problem. But we are going to engage in the activity that we need to engage in, with or without your help. We would prefer your help. We would prefer that you do most of the work, quite frankly. We don't want to come across your border. But if you don't, we cannot allow this infiltration and this impact and attack on our national sovereignty and safety. So it's not like, well, who cares? But ultimately, I think we have the right and the responsibility to protect ourselves as a nation.
Yep, well said. I guess another danger is escalation of violence against Americans in Mexico as retaliation.
Don't go.
Yeah, don't go. I mean, that's...
Get out.
Yeah.
And that sounds maybe flip too, but the thing is, if you know that we're going to be engaged now in this kind of operation,
right,
then... And by the way, I will almost guarantee that there are going to be travel warnings issued by the United States about Mexico. Hey, listen, don't go. we highly recommend you don't go. Then if you do go down there, then it's your responsibility. But that's one of the risk. You're right, Bill.
Yeah. The only other thing, Mark, is I guess I've heard that when you involve the military, it really all it does is decentralize the threat, fragment the threat, but the threat is still there. I don't know. I mean, it was obviously used on a much bigger scale in the global war on terror, but it eliminated really significant organizations, terrorist organizations around the world. So although I don't foresee anything on that scale happening, I think it can be successful, and I think it can definitely have an impact, whether it's with prosecutions here in the United States or if they set up some kind of Gitmo thing like they did, with the war on terror. I don't know. That's a possibility too.
It is.
I think that's it, folks. You heard the chief. He's for designating drug cartels, at least the two that we talked about, foreign terrorist organizations. I am for it now. My view has changed because of where we are in the situation now. I think it's time for some hard negotiating with the government of Mexico. Time to put our 18 to 45-year-olds first and not worry about some of the other things that we've been worrying about, change our priorities perhaps. And let's see what happens during the next, 120 days, Mark, 180 days. We should really know how our interactions with the government of Mexico, where they're going to go, and how much cooperation we're going to get on the drug threat and with the immigration threat.
Yep. I think we'll know very quickly. Things will be very stark and very apparent.
Leave a comment for us, folks. Let us know what you think. Should the U.S. government designate drug cartels as foreign terrorist organizations? If so, why? If not, why not? Thank you for joining us, and we will see you next time.